Have you ever wondered why we don't pay any GST on house rent? Wait, what? Should I now be worrying about paying GST on house rent also? Hi, this is Sia Purvachai on G for GST. You know what we do? We make videos on GST. You know what you should do? Hit the subscribe button. Did it ever occur to you that maybe the house rent that we pay is also subjected to GST? I mean, why not? Now that we are end up paying GST on everything like curd, lassi, buttermilk, chana, paneer, sab pay GST, then why not the house rent? Well, in this video, let's dive deep into this concept, especially because after the 47 GST Council meeting, there is a small twist to the story. So, let's get started. This video is brought to you by Filing Hour, India's first financial services aggregation platform. Download the application from Play Store and help us connect you to a host of finance professionals. Your compliances are now just a click away. So first, let's get the basics out of the way. House rent is basically nothing but a residential dwelling which is used for residential purpose. That's technical but important. Now, since the dawn of indirect taxes, that is during the service tax as well into GST, renting a house which is meant for use as residence has been exempt from GST. Oof, that's a relief. But wait. Now what happens is when these residential properties are leased out for commercial activities is where the twist of the story occurs. Now, most of the businesses, and for that matter it is quite safe to say almost all of them at the time of incorporation mention the residential address of either the founder's house or the chairman's house as the place of business. So the company gets incorporated with the registered office as the residence. And eventually it is this residential property that is appearing as the place of business on the GST portal also. Now it is typically this avenue that government wanted to tax. Now in the days when work from home has become a norm, business from home is like kuch bhi. I mean, every one of us has some or the other hustle activity, going on at home, trying to invent a product or working on a product, etc., etc. But when this house, which is actually a residential dwelling and it is meant for use as residence, is slightly taking a commercial turn and the business gets registered in GST with a residence as the place of business, now from July 2022, GST is triggered. So this new amendment has a wide range of ramifications for trading industry. If you are one of those associates who has a place of residence mentioned on the GST portal as the place of business, whether it could be principal place of business or additional place of business, but a residence is your place of business, then behold, you should start paying GST on this rent. So now that it is clear that if a residential property is leased out to a registered person under GST, it is taxable, the moot question that comes up is, who should pay this GST? I mean, in most of the situations, the lessor is either the associate himself or his spouse, or sometimes it's the parents' property that is mentioned on the GST portal, sometimes it is friends, siblings, etc., etc. But who should pay this GST? Because let's admit, the landlords, that is the lessor, is almost always unregistered because they are essentially not having any taxable turnover. So they did not find any necessity to take a GST registration. So now we are in a loop. I mean, government wants GST, but the lessor, that is the landlord, can't pay GST because he's unregistered. Then what do? Obviously, we ask the recipient, that is the registered lessee, to pay GST under reverse charge mechanism. So effective July, two things have happened. Number one, residential dwelling when rented out to a GST registered business attracts GST on the rent. And number two, it is the recipient of the service, that is the lessee, has to pay GST on behalf of the landlord under reverse charge mechanism. Now, This also has a far-fetched impact on especially those companies and businesses where the company sponsors the house rent of the key managerial personnel such as the MD or the chairman or the directors, etc., etc. So the company enters into rental agreements with landlords, and these companies would be registered under GST. So all this while, this was also enjoyed as an exemption because it was typically a residential dwelling leased for a residence purpose. But with this amendment, all these instances where the companies have entered into rental agreements in order to provide residents as a perquisite to their key managerial personnel also trigger GST under reverse charge mechanism. I know this is confounding. I mean, let's just admit what in GST isn't confusing. Nothing is straight as a needle. So I have a small matrix on my screen right now that I will be explaining to you to make things a little bit easier. Scenario A. So when the landlord is unregistered and the tenant, which he is doing some business, there is no doubt about it, the tenant is doing some business, but the tenant is also unregistered. So he has not obtained a GST registration, maybe because his turnover has not exceeded 20 lakhs or 40 lakhs as the case may be. So landlord is unregistered, tenant is unregistered, so there is absolutely no need to pay any GST and no one has to pay GST. Case B. The landlord is unregistered, but the tenant is a GST registered person. So the tenant is doing some commercial activity in a residential premise, and the tenant has also taken a GST registration. This is typically what the government wants to tax right now. So GST has to be paid, it will become a taxable supply, and GST has to be paid by the recipient, that is the registered business entity, under reverse charge mechanism. Scenario C. That is when the landlord is registered but the tenant who is doing some business is unregistered. Now, the reasons why landlord could be registered are unknown and irrelevant. Okay, and the reasons why tenant could be unregistered is obviously because his turnover threshold has not exceeded the 20 lakhs or 40 lakhs limit. So in this situation, while the landlord is registered but the tenant is unregistered, still the transaction would be an exempt supply. There will not be any GST and no one has to pay any GST. Scenario D, where both the landlord and the tenant are registered. Now the whole primordial element of taxability in the situation materializes in scenario B and scenario D, mainly because the tenant is registered. The amendment itself is the fact that GST is triggered when the tenant is registered. So in scenario D also, because the tenant is registered, the rent would now be liable to GST, and despite the fact that the landlord is registered under GST, still the tenant only has to pay GST under reverse charge mechanism. Well, that was the summary analysis of who should pay tax and when one should pay tax for renting of a residential dwelling. Now, there is absolutely no discussion needed for renting of a commercial property. It has been liable to GST since the dawn of indirect taxes and continues to remain so. So, commercial property renting attracts GST at 18%, period. Nothing to be discussed. And we hope you could get a glimpse and a thorough understanding, actually for that matter, into when one should pay GST while renting a residential property. And you know what you should do? You should like and share this video, and of course hit the subscribe button to stay on top of your GST feed.